What is going on, my fellow humans, and welcome back to another episode of the Sapien Score. Today we are going to be taking a look at the 2001 heist comedy Ocean's 11. As always, I've left my final score in the thumbnail, so for anybody out there who's trying to avoid all spoilers, you can just take a look and bounce. And without further ado, we're going to dive right on into things. So, full spoilers ahead. Let's get started. So, first things first is the cast. Ocean's 11 has a pretty large ensemble cast, and it is star-studded. To list a few of the major names in the movie, we've got George Clooney, Matt Damon, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, Don Cheadle, Bernie Mac, Casey Affleck, and a couple other big Hollywood names. On top of all of that, Ocean's 11 is just one of those movie names that I'd heard tossed around all the time when it comes to heist movies and kind of being a pioneer for the franchise. So it's definitely one of those household movie names that you hear a lot. And obviously, with all the spin-offs and sequels and such, I think it's a pretty recognizable franchise. Given these two facts, I am going to be honest, I went into this movie with some pretty high expectations, I guess, just because I've heard so much about it in the past, and also with the core cast of George Clooney, Brad Pitt, and Matt Damon, who I think are all pretty great actors. I was expecting quite a bit, and while it was a fun watch overall, I think it's a fun heist movie. It wasn't anything special in my opinion. As for positives, I will say that I did really enjoy the heist that they put together, and I liked the way that each of the 11 members of the crew kind of played their part, some more than others. However, the downside of this being that the fact that there were 11 members of the crew, it was kind of hard to keep track of the characters, and especially given the fact that Brad Pitt and George Clooney really take up most of the screen time being the main characters, as they should. I think it was just kind of difficult to follow along as the heist was coming together and kind of remember each person's role in the grand scheme of things. One thing I will point out, though, was Don Cheadle. I like the guy as an actor. I like him in other stuff. But my God, he had one of the worst accents I've ever seen put on in a movie. It was truly terrible. Straight up garbaccio. It truly shocks me how this made it through the entire movie making process, and nobody, not the director, not any of his castmates, pulled my guy Don to the side and say, "Hey, Don, either you got to work on this accent, buddy, or you should just drop it altogether." It's just the worst British accent I've ever heard, and there's no more to be said for it. Another positive note, in my opinion, was the villain of Terry Benedict, played by Andy Garcia. I think he did a really good job playing this unlikable, smug casino owner. And I think that when you genuinely dislike the character as a watcher of the movie, I think it's one of the telltale signs of a acting job well done in the villain role. Overall, I think that the job he does at playing this arrogant, smug character, not only being this kind of rich jerk, but also with the whole romantic subplot with George Clooney's ex-wife and him being the new boyfriend and just being a total schmuck about all that as well. I think his acting job as the villain and in that role really sells the heist, because it just makes the whole wrap-up of the movie and the completion of the heist and kind of the finale much more impactful. Honestly, I think his was the standout performance, and he did such a good job of being unlikable that you feel almost as if you're part of the crew and you're part of the team stealing his money by the end of the movie and really sticking it to him. My last main positive was the scene in the middle of the heist, or maybe towards the end of the heist, but when Brad Pitt and Matt Damon go to blow open the door with the explosive, and the Asian dude is stuck in the door. And luckily they don't blow him up because they're fumbling around with the remote detonator, and it turns out the batteries are dead. And he brings along the extra batteries. I thought this was probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. I thought it was just really well written, well acted, and was just funny. I thought it was genuinely the best scene. As for negatives, I think the main one, in my opinion, is the fact that this ensemble cast was just filled with top tier actors, and honestly, I think it just underdelivered. While it was a pretty decent movie, it was just that, decent. And especially given the caliber of people who are in this movie, I was expecting a bit more. And although I appreciate the fact that it laid the foundation for a lot of other heist movies and television and media that were made in the later 2000s and 2010s, I think the other ones out there do a better job, namely Rogue One, Sneaky Pete, and even Logan Lucky. I think each of these three did elements of Ocean's 11 better, whether it be suspense, whether it be the actual planning of the heist and the execution there, or the humor. Overall, in my opinion, Ocean's 11 felt just kind of generic. And apart from that explosive battery remote detonator scene, I didn't find it too humorous. Like, there's an occasional funny line, but I thought it was just kind of dry overall. My final two negatives are the underutilization of Matt Damon's character, especially given that he seemed he was going to be a lot more important in the movie, but really wasn't too important. And then lastly, the romantic subplot with Julia Roberts. I thought it seemed a little forced and corny, and I don't know. It just wasn't executed particularly well, in my opinion. All right, with all of that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give Ocean's 11 a Sapien score of 6.8. Overall, it was a pretty fun watch and a decent heist movie, but I will say that every single other heist movie or television show I've seen has done what Ocean's 11 does, but better. Whether it be Reservoir Dogs or the three that I mentioned before, Star Wars Rogue One, Logan Lucky, and Sneaky Pete, I think all of those just execute on the heist format much better. The fact that Ocean's 11 doesn't really do anything special, combined with a kind of underwhelming performance by a star-studded cast, just makes it an okay movie in my opinion. Definitely worth a watch, but probably not a rewatch. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning on in, and we'll catch you next time. Adios, amigos.